My name is Myriel Hutton. I am 34 years old, and I live in Denver, Colorado. My phone rang at 6:40 in the morning on a Thursday. I was already awake. I'd been up since 4, finalizing slides for a biotech conference. I looked at the screen and saw a name I hadn't seen light up my phone in 16 months. My mother, she never called this early. She rarely called at all anymore. I let it ring 4 times before I answered. Mire, honey, it's Mom. We're doing a family dinner Sunday. I'm making the pot roast, the one you used to love. Your father wants everyone there. It's been far too long. Sweetheart. I held the phone away from my ear and just looked at it for a second. 16 months of nothing. No call on my birthday. No text when I closed on my first house. No word when I got promoted to lead engineer at the firm. Nothing. But 4 days earlier, something had happened. 4 days earlier, a regional business outlet called Front Range Innovator ran a feature on a water filtration system. I'd spent 6 years developing a low-cost purification unit, now being licensed to municipal water districts across 3 states. The article mentioned a number, Sterling Aqua Systems, the company that bought the licensing rights, had structured the deal at $61 million over 7 years. That number traveled fast. By the next morning, it had been picked up by 2 national trade publications. My mother hadn't suddenly remembered she had a daughter. She'd read the article, she'd seen the number. And now, after a year and a half of silence, she was calling to invite me to pot roast. I used to dream about this call. I used to lie in bed as a teenager, wishing my phone would buzz with her name on it. Standing in my kitchen that morning, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold in my hand, I felt nothing. Not joy, not anger, just a strange, quiet stillness, like standing at the edge of a lake with no wind. Sure. Mom. I said, my voice even, what time? 6. Don't be late. Your father has something he wants to talk to you about. She hung up before I could say anything else. She always did that. She always needed to be the one who ended things. I set the phone on the counter. I already knew what the something was. I'd known for almost a month. But before I tell you about Sunday, you need to understand the Tuesday that changed everything. You need to understand what happened 3 years before that phone call. I had just received my approval letter from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. In engineering, that letter means everything. It means the thing you built in your head and in your garage is no longer just an idea, it's yours. Legally, permanently, it had taken me 5 years to get there. 5 years of working a full-time job during the day and running filtration tests in my garage at night. 5 years of failed prototypes, rejected grant applications. And evenings spent crying on my bathroom floor because I was certain it would never work. But it did work. And I wanted to celebrate with the people who were supposed to be proudest of me. I planned a dinner at my parents' house in Castle Pines. I told my mother 3 weeks ahead of time. I told my father, I told my older brother, Holden, and my older sister, Brielle. I even told my Aunt Pam, who would show up to anything with free food. I drove an hour from Denver with a bottle of good wine, a bouquet of sunflowers, and a framed copy of my patent certificate. I wanted to hang it in the hallway, next to Holden's football trophies and Brielle's pageant sashes. I arrived at 6:30. The house was dark. The driveway was empty. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before I texted my mother, "Hey, I'm here. Where is everyone?" She replied 20 minutes later, "Oh no, Didn't Holden tell you, we're all at Brielle's launch party. She's debuting her candle line at the Castle Pines Market tonight. It's a really big moment for her. We couldn't miss it. A candle line. Brielle had been pouring soy wax into mason jars for about 4 months. She'd sold maybe 15 candles on a hobby website. No business license, no formal training, but she had a launch party. And my entire family chose mason jar candles over 6 years of my work. My father didn't even send a text. He simply wasn't there. I sat in that dark driveway for a long time. The wine grew warm in the August heat. The sunflowers wilted on the passenger seat next to the framed certificate I'd been so proud of that morning. By the time I drove home, it looked foolish to me. Like a child's drawing brought home to parents who were already busy applauding to someone else. I never showed them the certificate. They never asked to see it. That wasn't the first time. It was just the time something inside me finally went quiet for good. The pattern had been there my whole life. When I was 12, I won the state science fair. The awards ceremony was on a Saturday afternoon. My mother told me she couldn't take me because Brielle had a dress fitting for a pageant that same evening. You understand, don't you? Murray, this could be Brielle's big break. I rode to the ceremony with my science teacher, Mr. Aldous. He sat in the front row and clapped so loud I was embarrassed. He took a photo of me holding the trophy. When I got home, my mother was steaming a pageant gown on the kitchen table. How'd it go? She asked, without looking up. I won? I said, that's wonderful. Sweetie, grabbed me the safety pins from the drawer. The trophy sat on my dresser for years. No one in my family ever mentioned it again. When I graduated with my engineering degree, my parents came to the ceremony but spent most of it whispering about Holden's new auto repair shop. At the reception, my father shook my hand and said, good for you. Kiddo, now when are you going to settle down? Holden's already married. Brielle's engaged. You're falling behind. I had just graduated with $160. 000 in student debt. Because my parents had told me plainly that they couldn't help with tuition. That same year, they gave Holden $55,000 to open his shop, a family investment. My father called it, when I asked, even once, if they could help with a single loan payment. He told me, engineering was your choice. Mireille, Holden's building something for the whole family. It never built anything for me. So when my mother called that Thursday morning with her sudden warmth and her pot roast invitation, I understood exactly what was happening. The article had changed my value. For 34 years, I had been worth nothing worth showing up for. Now, because a number with 7 zeros appeared next to my name, I was suddenly worth Sunday dinner. I had 2 choices. I could ignore the call and keep building my life, or I could walk into that house one final time and close every door behind me, quietly and completely. I chose the second option, but I was going to do it on my terms. Sunday came. I stood in front of my closet for a long time. I owned nice things now, a charcoal blazer that cost more than my first car payment. Heels that made me feel 6 inches taller. A watch a mentor had helped me pick out after the licensing deal closed. I reached for the blazer. Then I put it back. If I walked in looking successful, they'd be careful. They'd choose their words. I needed them comfortable. I needed them to see the old Muriel quiet. Agreeable. The one who said, it's fine when she meant you broke something in me. I pulled out an old flannel shirt with a coffee stain near the hem, faded jeans, and sneakers with a hole starting at the toe. I scraped my hair into a ponytail. No makeup. no jewelry. I looked tired in the mirror. Good. In the parking garage, I had 2 cars. My new sedan, sleek and quiet, and my old gray hatchback from college, the one with a dented bumper and a passenger mirror held on with packing tape. I took the hatchback. It smelled like old protein bar wrappers and stale coffee. It smelled like struggle. On the drive to Castle Pines, the old voice tried to crawl back in my mother's voice, soft and warning. Don't be difficult. Nobody likes a difficult woman. Just smile and go along with it. I gripped the wheel and reminded myself who I was now. I was an engineer who'd been in rooms with state regulators and corporate attorneys who ate people alive for a living. And I hadn't blinked. My family didn't scare me anymore. They just disappointed me. And tonight, I was done being disappointed quietly. I pulled into the driveway at 5:55. The house was lit up like a stage set. My father's black truck gleamed in its usual spot. Holden's lifted pickup sat beside it. Brielle's white SUV was parked at the end of the driveway. None of them, I now knew, could actually afford the vehicles they were driving. I parked my dented hatchback right between the truck and the SUV. It looked like a stray dog wedged between 2 show horses. Before I went in, I checked my phone. A text from Camille, my attorney, documents finalized. I'm 15 minutes out, parked at the gas station on Founders Parkway. Text me when you're ready. I typed back, give me 45 minutes. I rang the doorbell. My mother opened it instantly, like she'd been watching from the window. Murray. She pulled me into a tight, theatrical hug that smelled like rosemary and expensive perfume. She held me at arm's length. Look at you. So thin. Are you eating enough? You work too hard. She hadn't asked if I was eating in 16 months. Hi, Mom. I said I didn't hug her back. She didn't notice. She pulled me inside like I was a guest of honor at a party I hadn't been invited to in a year and a half. The dining room had the good tablecloth out, the candles lit, the wedding china that only appeared for holidays and performances. My father stood at the head of the table holding a glass of bourbon, wearing the navy button-down he wore whenever he wanted to look like a man in charge. Holden sat beside him, scrolling his phone. Hey, Cease, he said, not looking up. Brielle sat across the table, adjusting a collection of candles she'd clearly brought to show off. She looked me over. Cute shirt. She said it wasn't a compliment. Aunt Pam was already on her second glass of wine. There she is. My father announced, walking over to squeeze my shoulder like he was placing a hand on property he owned. Our genius. He had never once called me that. Not at graduation, not when I told them about my first patent application, which he'd called a hobby that's taking too much of your time. Now I was a genius. The transformation was almost funny. We sat. My mother brought out the pot roast, the roasted carrots, the bread she only baked for company. It was a performance dressed up as a family dinner. The conversation was aggressively normal. Brielle talked about wanting a storefront for her candles. The website's limiting me. I need a real space, a real brand presence. Her candle line had made about $3,000 in over a year. Holden complained about the shop. The market's brutal right now. Overhead's killing me. He didn't mention that he'd fired his best mechanic last month for outperforming him, I knew, because that mechanic had called me for a reference 2 weeks earlier. My mother wanted to redo the kitchen. Everyone has quartz now. Granite's so outdated. My father kept refilling my water glass even though I hadn't asked. My mother kept touching my arm. Holden was unusually polite. Brielle complimented my hair. something she had never done in her life. They were warming me up, tenderizing the meat before the ask. I decided to speed things along. So, Dad, I said, setting down my fork. Mom said you had something to talk to me about. The temperature in the room shifted. Subtle but unmistakable. Like the pressure drop before a storm. My father cleared his throat, glanced at my mother, and reached under his chair for a leather folder. He slid it across the table. The cover had a glossy rendering of a storefront in gold lettering that read, Hutton and Wick Artisan Candle Co. Inside were architectural sketches, optimistic revenue projections, and a 5-year plan that looked like it had been assembled from a weekend business seminar. Here's the vision. My father said, using the tone he used when he thought he sounded impressive. We're going to turn Brielle's brand into something real. A flagship store downtown. Custom scents, gift sets, the whole experience. We already found the perfect space. Brielle jumped in. Exposed brick. Huge windows. Right on Main Street. And I'm handling the business side. Holden added accounting, operations, all of it. I scanned the numbers. They were fiction. Rent at $7,000 a month. Build-out costs estimated at $290,000. Revenue projections that assume they'd outsell established boutiques within their first quarter. This is a big project. I said evenly, what's the investment? My father met my eyes. We need $600,000 to get it off the ground. The table went silent. It's a family investment, my mother said softly, reaching across to touch my hand. Her fingers were cold. We're building something together. A real legacy. We'd pay you back. My father added quickly, with interest. Think of it as a loan. You'd be a silent partner. Silent partner. I had been silent my whole life. It was the only role they'd ever offered me. Where exactly does the $600,000 go? I asked. My father rattled off numbers billed out. Inventory. Marketing. First year's lease. Have you tried a bank loan? I asked. Holden shifted in his seat. Banks are too slow. Too much red tape. This opportunity won't wait. We talked about outside investors. My father said, but your mother and I agreed family first. We wanted to give you first chance at this. I almost laughed. First chance? The same family that had given me last place for 34 years was now offering me first chance at handing over $600,000. That's generous. I said, can I ask a few more questions? Of course, my father said, smiling. He thought the hook was set. Holden, since you're running the business side, walk me through the shop's current financials. What about them? If you're going to manage the back end of a new venture, I'd want to understand how the current one is doing. It's fine, Holden said quickly. Seasonal slowdown. Tight, but manageable. Manageable. I repeated. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin manila folder I'd been carrying for almost a month. That's interesting, I said, opening it, because according to the Secretary of State's public filings, Wick Auto Repair has operated at a net loss for the last 2 years. The room temperature dropped. Those filings are outdated. Holden stammered. They show $290,000 in outstanding debt to your parts supplier. I continued, calm as a surgeon. 3 missed payments in the last 5 months. A default notice filed in September. Where did you even get that? Holden asked, his face draining of color. Public record. I said, Anyone can look it up. I turned to my father. And Dad, when did you take out the second mortgage on this house? The silence that followed had weight to it, the kind that presses on your chest. That is none of your business, my father said, jaw tight. It became my business the moment you asked me for $600,000. I said, you refinanced 14 months ago. You pulled out $170,000 in equity. It went to Holden Shop and Brielle's startup costs. Neither business generates enough to cover the new monthly payment. You've been late 4 times this year. My mother gasped. Mireille, that's enough. You're behind on property taxes too. I went on. The county filed a lien in August. My father slammed his palm on the table. The candles trembled. Who do you think you are? He snapped. Coming into my house, your house, which the bank owns 83% of, I said quietly, that house. Nobody spoke. I looked at Brielle. Your candle business made about $3,000 in 18 months. Your projections for the flagship assume $30,000 a month in revenue. That's an 800% jump with no customer base and no track record. Who wrote these numbers? Her lip trembled. I did. With help from a consultant who charged you $4,000 to tell you what you wanted to hear. I said, paid with a credit card Dad co-signed. That card is maxed out. Brielle looked at our father. He didn't answer. His knuckles were white against the edge of the table. Here's the truth. I said, standing, my voice didn't shake. You don't need $600,000 for a candle store. You need it to keep everything from collapsing. The shop is drowning. The mortgage is slipping. The credit cards are maxed. You've been moving money between sinking accounts for 2 years. And now you're out of accounts. I looked around the table. You didn't invite me here because you missed me. You invited me because you're desperate. You saw the article. You saw a number. And you thought, Mireille has money now. Mireille can save us. The same Mireille you skipped for a candle launch. The same Mireille you didn't call for 16 months. That was a misunderstanding. My mother whispered, it was a choice. I said, every single time. You chose Holden Shop over my student loans. You chose Brielle's pageants over my science fair. You chose silence over one phone call on my birthday. The room erupted. Holden called me ungrateful. Brielle started crying. My father said I owed them for raising me. Aunt Pam muttered that I'd always been cold. That no man would want someone who threw numbers around at the dinner table. I let it all wash over me. 3 years earlier, those words would have broken something in me. I would have written the check, driven home, and cried for a week. But the silence of the last 16 months had taught me something their words never could. I didn't need their approval. It wasn't oxygen. It was just noise. When the shouting finally died down, I spoke again. I'm not giving you $600,000. That's final. Then get out. My father growled, not looking at me. Get out of my house. You're no daughter of mine. I've heard that before. I said, but before I go, there's one more thing. I pulled out my phone and sent 2 words, come in. 3 minutes later, the doorbell rang. My mother looked confused. My father looked furious. I walked to the door myself and opened it. Camille stepped inside, wearing a steel gray suit and carrying a thick accordion file. She walked straight to the dining table and set it down without a greeting. Who is this? Holden demanded. My attorney. I said, She's also very good at math. I opened the file. 3 weeks ago. I said, I learned about your financial situation, the defaults, the liens, the missed payments. I didn't call to warn you. Instead, I made some calls of my own. My father's anger drained into something else. Fear. I contacted your parts supplier. Holden, the one financing your shop's inventory. They were done with you. They were planning to seize your equipment and inventory next month. So I bought the debt at a discount. Holden stood so fast his chair tipped backward. You did what? I own the note now. I said, every piece of equipment in that shop belongs to me until it's repaid, which it won't be. Because you can't make the payments. This is insane. Brielle breathed. Then I contacted the loan servicer on this house. I continued, Dad, you thought you were dealing with your original bank. You weren't. Your mortgage was sold to a servicing company almost a year ago. They were preparing to begin foreclosure. I acquired that note 2 days ago. My father looked like a man watching his own house burn down in slow motion. You bought our mortgage? He whispered, I'm your lender now. I said, when you told me to get out of your house, you were talking to the person who owns the paper on it. My mother started shaking. Why would you do this to your own family? I didn't do this to you. I said, you did this to yourselves. The debt existed before I ever touched it. I just bought the right to decide what happens next. Camille placed a bound document on the table, sealed and notarized. Here are my terms. I said, I'm taking ownership of Wick Auto Repair. Effective immediately. Holden, you're terminated as operator. Dad, your personal guarantee on the shop's debt is released. You're free of that liability. Holden opened his mouth. Nothing came out. As for the house, I'm restructuring the mortgage, lower payment, fixed rate, 30-year term. You can stay. But the second mortgage is dissolved. The equity you pulled to fund failing businesses doesn't get replaced with my money. It gets replaced with discipline. I slid a check across the table. $40,000. Consider it a fresh start. Not a loan. Use it for back taxes and credit card minimums. Or don't. There won't be a second check. My father stared at it without touching it. And if we refuse to sign, Aunt Pam asked, then I foreclose in 30 days. I said, I repossess the shop's equipment next week. Holden files bankruptcy. Dad's credit becomes a cautionary tale. And everyone at the country club reads about it in the local paper. I let that settle. I knew exactly what they feared most. It wasn't poverty. It was being seen. You have 10 minutes. I said, and walked to the window. Outside, sprinklers ran on the neighbor's lawn. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Everything looked completely ordinary. Behind me, I heard frantic whispering. My mother crying softly. Holden swearing under his breath. Then I heard what I was waiting for, the scratch of a pen on paper. My father signed. His hand was shaking. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 10 minutes. Camille verified the signatures, notarized the documents, and placed a copy in front of each of them. The transfer is effective immediately. She said, flat and clinical, Mireille. My father said quietly, we made mistakes, but we're still your family. I looked at him and thought of the dark. Empty driveway, the warm wine, the certificate hidden in a drawer for years, the science fair trophy no one mentioned again, the $55,000 handed to Holden while I ate ramen and studied thermodynamics, You're not my family. Dad, I said quietly, you're people I grew up with. Family shows up, family calls back. Family doesn't need a magazine article to remember your name. I picked up my bag. I nodded to Camille, who gathered her files. Holden, I said, the truck is a business asset now. I'll need the keys. You're serious. Completely. He dropped the keys on the table without another word. I walked toward the door. Mireille. Wait. My mother called. Please. Sit down. Let's talk like a family. I'll make coffee. We can't. Mom, I said, stopping without turning around. You skipped my patent celebration to watch Brielle sell candles. You forgot my birthday. You didn't call me for 16 months. And now you want to talk like family because I'm the only one who can write a check. I opened the door. The night air was cool and clean. That's not family. I said, that's accounting. I walked out, and the door clicked shut behind me. Final and quiet. I got into my old hatchback, the dented bumper, the taped up mirror, and started the engine. It coughed, then caught. I pulled out of the driveway, past the truck and the SUV that now technically belonged to me, and rolled down my window. The air smelled like cut grass and something close to freedom. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother, please come back. We can fix this. You're my baby. Don't do this to us. I stared at the word baby. She only ever used it when she needed something, when I was a child and she needed quiet. When I was a teenager and she needed my room for guests. When I was an adult and she needed me to disappear so Holden and Brielle could shine. I opened my contacts. Mom, block. Dad, block. Holden, block. Brielle, block. Aunt Pam, block. 5 names disappeared from my phone. 5 angers. Cut loose. I drove north toward Denver. The highway empty. Headlights cutting through the dark. I thought about what I was leaving behind, a house full of people who only loved me when I was useful. A lifetime spent as the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who never caused trouble and so never seemed to deserve attention. And I thought about what was ahead. My lab, my team, who respected my work without needing a headline to convince them. My house, where a patent certificate had spent 3 years in a drawer and was finally, the next morning, going up on the wall. Revenge isn't loud. It's not a scream or a scene at a dinner table. Real revenge is the moment you stop needing the people who never needed you. It's building a life so full that the people who abandon you become background noise small. Faded footnotes at the bottom of a page nobody bothers to read anymore. I turned on the radio. A song I liked was playing. I hummed along, checked the rearview mirror one last time, and watched the lights of Castle Pines shrink behind me. Dim and distant, like stars that had already burned out but hadn't stopped glowing yet. I kept my eyes on the road ahead. The hatchback rattled. The heater barely worked. But the tank was full and the engine ran strong. And for the first time in 34 years, I was driving towards something that belonged entirely to me. Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you the most? Just to finally find out who you really are